from the ACT Chess Association covering their online events, which are currently being held on leechess.org, but possibly not for long. At the end of this week, the ACT here at Canberra, where Canberra is located, will be opening up, and we're getting back to face-to-face chess. Street chess will be running on Saturday, the 30th of October, and I think the local chess clubs are starting to go back. I know the Gungahlin Chess Club will be returning on the 2nd of November. But this was an event that was played yesterday evening, and it's our regular Monday night Blitz, which was won in the end by, I think I'm going to say, I should check the results properly. It's escaped me for a second. Now, here we go. Let me check. I'm just being a bit lazy today. So, unprepared. Pull up the results. The Monday Night Blitz was, in fact, won by Miles Patterson in first place with a very impressive 7 out of 8. And equal second were Matt Rad and David Attack. And, in fact, it's the game between those two players that I plan to feature today. This one's a short and sweet game where White plays a fairly standard attacking plan against the Sicilian defence, and Black doesn't quite defend as well. And I'll get into the topic of how to defend these things in a bit, but let's just start with the moves. Deviant Attack is White, and they've probably played this position a few times already, as they are regular players in our tournaments, and they tend to get paired against each other fairly quickly. So we're just playing a standard Sicilian setup. This one sort of doesn't have too many individual or distinct lines. It tends to transpose into other openings, which I'm going to show very shortly. For example, if Black decides to play g6 here, and after f3, bishop g7, bishop c4, castles, queen, 2, dragon, as Black has, with the knight c6 move coming in. So Black has transposed into a dragon. He played a6, which does give the opportunity to end up in what's sometimes known as the Drag-Dorf variation, which is a cross. But we're still in theory. What could be played? And e5 is normally a move that follows up a6, is that they see a move like a6 early on in the Sicilian and scratch their heads because aren't you supposed to be developing pieces? And that is correct. But what had been discovered, especially by Neudorf, but by other players after the Second World War, e5, which is normally a nice move to kick the knight off d4 in the Sicilian, often gets met by knight b5. And so a6 came in first to protect the b5 square. So the knight retreats instead, but it does open up that nice diagonal for the bishop on c4, attacking f7. Certainly with the openings like Sicilian, if you want to do one thing, you might give up something else. Just played an e5 landed anyway. We played plan early on is playing d5. d5 is incredibly crucial for the outcome. Keep coming back to d5, d5, d5. Potentially the argument being that White sort of has a slightly better arrangement of squares for their pieces, so keeping more pieces on is good. Bishop e6, queen d2, and now here's the first opportunity where d5 really works. Black could have played d5, and the d4 is now the threat, forking the bishop and knight. So we take, knight takes, and then it's just a let's just take everything off the board approach. And this position is pretty equal. Both sides have got two bishops, both sides are developed, both sides have castled. The only thing to take note is that on the king side, White has 3 pawns and Black has 4 pawns. And on the queen side, White has 3 pawns and Black has 2 pawns. And you might say to yourself, well, why is that important, given the number of pawns is equal? It just means there's a potential for, if all those pawns get exchanged off, it ends up with White having a passed pawn on the queen side and Black having a passed pawn on the king side. And in the ending, that can become important. Instead, bishop e7 was played, which is slightly dubious. And White continued with g4, which is a pretty standard attacking plan in some lines, and also one that White has used with great success in the past. So White is essentially playing what they know. They know this opening. They've played it before. They know which plans work, which plans don't work. And so they're following that script. The slight problem with that approach is that Attacks like this can look like they're until you actually play someone who knows how to stop them. And then at this point, the attacks don't work. Again, black can keep hitting back with d5. And there's a saying attributed possibly to Lasker, which is an attack on the flank is best met by counter-attack in the centre. And this is what black needed to do. Having said all that, this means that in fact there's a better move for white here, and that is knight d5, stopping black from fighting back. And this is kind of what I get to when I talk about these things work until you run into someone who stops them from working. Not only is there just the notion of the bishop going into b6 here to attack the queen, we can castle, castle long, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight goes b8 and back. White has, again, slightly more space and more squares for their pieces. That knight is going to lose some time to reroute. White is slightly better in this position. Not massively better, just slightly better. We could just start swapping pieces off straight away. And again, we're going for the slightly more space for white. The move to avoid in this position, of course, is taking with the knight, because after walking the two pieces, then you're going to win material here. White is completely winning. So d5 was an interesting. After g4, d5 again, play d5. Maybe in this case, to be fair, black was afraid of g5, because when the knight retreats, pawn takes just does fork two pieces and wins material. But black had a nice little counter tactic, which was knight takes e4. And at first you go, well, can't I just take? But then d4 lands on the board, forking the white knight and the white bishop, and black is going to win back that piece and have quite a good position here. So d5 was the move. Because after castles, 4 follows the plan. It's a shame that I'm giving a mark, but I am. Castling here was this actually stops d5 from being played completely, because the rook and the queen are now covering that square. But h4, and again, last chance, play d5, play d5, play d5, play d5. And hopefully the next time both these players meet, d5 will land on the board. There's a saying about arguments that I've seen recently: the point of an argument isn't to find a winner. The point of the argument is to advance knowledge. And consequently, looking at this game and seeing that d5 is the move that works should advance the knowledge of the players playing. So the rook went to c8, lined up down the open c file, castles, and now white is slightly better, especially after knight d7, g5. This pawn storm is now starting to gain some strength. So queen went to c7, and then knight d5 now. So making sure that there are no huge tricks. I mean, c2 can be an issue here, because the queen, supported by the rook, okay, is aiming at c2. So white has just to be careful of some counter-attacking tricks. So the bishop took, pawn took. Now, funnily enough, the knight can actually go to b4, even though it's unprotected, simply because queen takes does run into that trick that I've just mentioned, queen taking down on c2. But even after knight b4, we just play this move here to try and jam the file. And as much as it's starting to look like black has some scary stuff, they really don't. You can't get away with being greedy and taking the pawn here, even though it's a check, because after the king goes across, knight goes back, we actually can take, because of course there's no checkmate down here on c2 anymore. So the knight scurried back to a7. King b1 is a good move here, which will become apparent shortly. b5, so black is still aiming for this attack on the queen side. But bishop d3, now white has just got themselves nice and organised. Black pieces can't defend on the king side, which is really important here, because that pawn on g5 is keeping out both the knight and the bishop. h7 is becoming a target, and it's just a question of getting organised. Knight b6, so white took the opportunity of gaining a tempo by exchanging. It also removes one of the attacking pieces on the queen side. And note that bishop really isn't doing anything to help white on the king side, so swapping off is not a bad idea. Okay, queen takes bishop f5, another tempo, just going to hit the rook there, and this turns out to be a good move, again, for other reasons. So the rook moved, and then h5. And so we're coming up the board. b4, I'm not sure, a little bit slow. I know the idea is to play a5, a4. G6. And at this point, black kind of just collapsed into a bit of a heap. H6 could have been played. G takes F7, king takes F7, queen to G2. Not a bad idea. We're trying to play queens into G6, bishops into E6, looking for some checkmates. Bishop G5 to try and block that square. And that's the other reason why king B1, I mentioned a couple of moves ago, works in this position, because it's not a check anymore. The king was still sitting on C1, be a check. So F4 to drive it away. After bishop takes, we just go check. King to E7, queen takes, rook comes across, queen G4, and white is better, but not completely winning this position. And this is the line that black needed to find, I think, to try and hang on. It's slightly a weird thing because H6 here is the saving move, and then 2 moves later or 3 moves later, H6 is the lemon move. So instead, after G6 took, okay, bishop E6 was a nice intermediate move, driving the king to the F file, and in fact, it's almost all over now. You could put the rook in the road, and then bishop takes to win the exchange, or some other lines as well, or just pawn takes pawn to open the H file, swing the queen across. King goes in the corner, now H takes, and rook takes H7, checkmate is being threatened in this position. Black played to stop that, but then the rook sack landed on the rook takes, king takes, pawn takes is forced, and then queen takes is checkmate. And that was it. It was all pretty brutal from about once G5 started landing on the board. Black could still defend, but not particularly well. Black would still have a worse position. The real missed opportunity was way back here with D5 or D5 in this position. Either D5 on move 9, D5 on move 10. And that was what black really needed to look for. Hopefully, in the future, faced with this position, the idea of D5 will start to come to mind. But it was still a good win for deviant attackers white, especially because he followed a plan that's tried and tested. He's tested it before. It has worked. His opponent may throw a spanner in the work next time. But that whole idea of moving the pawns. The only takeaway from this game in terms of improving going forward would be just to make sure that black doesn't have that play in the center before you start launching on the king side. And then pretty much the attack becomes even more unstoppable. So that was from last night's ACT Chess Association Online Blitz event. It was played with a time limit of 5 minutes flat. It was won by Miles Patterson ahead of Matt Rad and Max Albert and Matt Radicic. This may be one of the last online blitzes we're running for the rest of the year, simply because if Tuggeranong Chess Club goes back on Monday night, we won't be running these in competition. Normally we only run these when the clubs aren't meeting. And it's the same tonight. There's an online rapid. Maybe next week it'll be back to Gungahlin Chess Club. My name's Sean Press. I organise these things on behalf of the ACT Chess Association and then do these summaries the next day. So thanks for tuning in, and I will be back tomorrow covering possibly the last of our online rapid events.